Well, good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. Yes, it's hump day. It's a Wednesday for Market Rebellion. This is The Take. Can I tell you something? The markets yesterday were absolutely extraordinary in terms of the move to the upside, the strength that the markets had, and some of that leadership. And we're going to break down a little bit of that and why it's so extraordinary to me because, well, I'll give you one right now. Every single stock in the Dow actually closed in the green yesterday. That's not something that we see on a normal basis. There's normally something that's going to move into the red. Nope. Every single one of the 30 stocks yesterday actually finished up into the green. So really, really strong. We started off in the pre-markets. That was strong. Then that accelerated all the way into the close, and we had this monster move over 500 plus points. Now, earlier in the week, on Monday, we talked about a market that was up 500 points, gave it back. Then all of a sudden, we cut that in half yesterday, and the next thing you know, we have this big accelerated move to the upside all the way into the close. And what was that powered by? Energy and industrials, Caterpillar, Boeing, Dow, those names all exploding to the upside. But then add in some of these energy names. Look at Chevron, look at Exxon. The price of oil still holding very solid right around that 41 level. We didn't see a lot of movement in oil. Let's call it 40, 41. You look at gold, it's holding above 1800, call it between 1800 and 1820, sort of in that range. But then we look over at the financials. Now, the interesting aspect of the financials yesterday is we kicked off earnings season. We heard from JP Morgan. We heard from Citi. We heard from some of the banks, Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, complete disaster. JP Morgan, phenomenal. The stock actually started the day very, very strong. Gave up a lot of those gains. And it's as if the financials just can't get themselves going. But things might have changed today. Before we get into that, though, what was really powering from the financial aspect yesterday? Well, you had Visa, you had some American Express movement, you had Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs has been the name, and a lot of that has to do with it's a financial. Let's not call Goldman Sachs really a bank, right? I mean, the reality is what happened in the financial crisis changed how a lot of these names are looked at, probably. Goldman Sachs, I'm not so sure I'm putting them in the bank category. And as a matter of fact, I look at them more in the financial world, and I look at them more as what we probably view a Morgan Stanley. You've got wealth management, you've got this, you've got that, and there's a lot of similarities there, although there's some breakoffs that are not comparable either. But so Goldman Sachs, not necessarily a bank. And you could see some of the disparity in the movements yesterday from the perception going forward, what Goldman might be having to say today with their earnings report, and also the connectivity of what that really meant for JP Morgan. And we'll get into that in just a second. But first, the SMH yesterday, it closed into the red, and it had a pretty big move off of the lows as well. As the markets started to move to the upside, everything sort of gets pulled along, I guess, along the way. And when I look over at energy and I look at the XLE up 3.5%, I look at the OIH. Now, we talk about the OIH all the time. So that's sort of the beta names in terms of the energy space. And you can see exactly that. They're going to trade at a higher beta, so they're going to move both to the downside and to the upside at a much faster rate when you're looking at many of these various names. Now, an area that's been strong and continues to hold up very, very nicely, even in difficult days, has been biotech healthcare. And I look over at Regeneron, I look at Vertex, I look at J&J, I look at United Health. Those names all holding up pretty well and participating along the way with some of this move in the market. 556 points. That's an absolute explosive move. Now, you watch the Volatility Index, which had been moving higher and higher for all the right reasons, and it had a pretty big range yesterday, trading somewhere between, call it 29 and 34, actually closed near the low end of the day. Makes some sense as the market started to free up a little bit, but traded around 29.50. And that made probably about sense. We're talking about very close to a 2% move expected out of the S&P. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. We talk about this all the time, but how about the movements in the marketplace? Not the what did it open at, where did it close at, but all that movement in between. And again, yesterday, one of those days that was very, very big. And like I say, you had that great reaction out of JP Morgan early and then giving it back. But Goldman Sachs holding on and up about 2.5% yesterday, while Wells Fargo was down as much as 7% on the lows. Came off of that pretty nicely, but still well into the red, about down 4.5%. So cut down on some of those losses. Now, you follow that up, 556 points to the upside yesterday. That's followed up with a 500-point move in the pre-market today. Now, we haven't even been close to that once we got into the markets and shows you a little bit about what can happen in the pre-markets, less liquidity, all the rest of that. But we opened around, call it 400 points to the upside, pretty strong. What were the two drivers? Goldman Sachs, their earnings were extraordinary, and Moderna, and some of the positive potential from the data, the vaccine going forward for Corona. And that alone can really move the markets in a big way, and it certainly did. And we're talking about all the names that you would expect to be moving: travel, leisure, casinos, hotels, the possibilities of the economy reopening, and that possibility, because there's been so many concerns and some of the push down on the markets recently when we've had push downs has been because of the fact that we're seeing areas that are actually starting to have to close down back again and retract what some of the reopening looked like. So because of that, I think that's what we're really seeing going on right now. And this Moderna news certainly given the markets at least a pretty good spark early on. It was up as much as 500. Now I'm looking at the markets. We're just a little over a half hour into the trading session. We're up about 260 points. Not a bad day, but certainly well off of that 500-point move that we had to the upside early. So we started off about 400 points higher, call it 1.5%. But the NASDAQ was lagging. It was up about 0.6%, up about 60 points. Then it started to accelerate back to the upside. We started to see some of the participation of Microsoft, of Apple, of Google, of Facebook, those names really starting to participate. Well, we're starting to see a little bit of a pullback once again in the NASDAQ after that big, it was up 60 points, up 100 points, now back, it's up about 80 points. And what's really kind of pulling on that, because there's a push and a pull here. I mentioned the names that are pulling it to the upside. Some of the reasons why it's probably not keeping up right now with the Dow in terms of the percentage and the move. You've got the semiconductors. They're not trading very well. They're in the red right now. They started off negative, and then it's a lot of the names that are the stay-at-home names. It's Zoom, it's Activision, it's Take-Two, it's EA. You get the understanding there. Those have been some of the leaderships of why we've seen some of these dislocated moves in terms of the NASDAQ to the upside. Well, they are pulling on it today, but not enough to pull it into the red, obviously. We are still seeing pretty strong move to the upside, now up about 75 points. Now, energy, again today, continues to be very strong. It's up about 2.5%. So look over at the OIH. What would you expect? Yep, it's up about 4% today. So when we look around and we see energy moving to the upside, we've talked a lot about materials recently. We've had a lot of unusual option activity in some of the materials. Vale was one of the names that we've talked about not too long ago on the take, where we were looking at some of these material names because we've seen a little bit more and a little bit more, and there's some cracks in terms of that. We'll get more to that in a second. But I look over at the industrials, still trading pretty well, up about 1.75%. And some of those industrial names, wow, right out of the gate, Boeing this morning had a really nice shot up to 188. It's pulled back off of that. But then you had Raytheon and Dow. And so you get the idea of what are some of the areas that are powering the Dow. Goldman Sachs, definitely Goldman Sachs. When you've got trading revenue up 93%, that definitely was the driving point of what we were hearing from JP Morgan yesterday. But unfortunately for JP Morgan, they are a bank. And so there are some areas of the bank, when you go through all the different areas of their different revenue segments, there is some pull there as well. Well, Goldman Sachs doesn't really have that. Goldman Sachs is up about 4% earlier. Haven't seen it go by recently, but up about 4% earlier. So nice, big, explosive move to the upside for a name that's been fighting and moving a little bit better than the rest of the names in the XLF anyhow. So copper is something we don't talk as much about. We talk about oil, we talk about gold, and we should probably focus, and I've talked about it a little bit recently, but I'll hit on copper once again. Copper is steadily getting closer and closer to $3. And what that really means is off of the lows and off of where copper was, this is a really nice reaction for copper to be lifting higher and higher and higher and getting closer to that $3 level. Now, in the materials space, I got some unusual option activity for you today. We talk about Vale, we talk about Freeport-McMoRan, we talk about a lot of different names in the materials area. Some are copper, some are steel, some are iron ore, all the rest of that. But U.S. steel today hitting. Now, what I like about this is it's inexpensive, it gives opportunity, and here's what we were seeing. About 4,000 of next Friday, the 24th of July. So Friday, July 24th, the 9 calls. Now, stock's trading 780, so it's below 8. It's going to have to make a decent move Doesn't mean it has to get all the way up to 9, because the options can start to move rapidly if the price of U.S. steel starts to move rapidly up to the upside. So what are we seeing? Well, 4,000 of these next week's 9 calls. They're trading for about 10 cents. So an inexpensive option. We've seen buyers come into U.S. Steel. We've seen them come into Freeport-McMoRan. We've seen Vale. We've seen a lot of the various names, and we've seen some return buys as we've started to watch some of this move to the upside. We had Cliffs just about a week or so ago, and they were buying the 6 calls. Well, the stock did shoot right through 6 within a day or so. So the possibilities of movement in the material space does seem to be present, and we do see more and more activity across various areas within the material space. And I'm not talking gold. I'm talking the coppers and iron ores and that type of thing, steel. And that's what we're seeing. So a lot of interesting paper, a lot of interesting things going on. Let's give you a quick recap. I will be on the 5 o'clock show this evening. We don't do unusual option activity there. Not sure why, but obviously there will be some commentary about what's going on in the options markets. By the way, the volume yesterday did pull back significantly from where we were the previous couple of sessions, which was interesting because we had a pretty nice move in the markets, but pulled back. Still, when you trade over 26 million option contracts in a single day, that's still a big day. It's just not as big as what we have seen in previous sessions. So the volumes are still there, and it's absolutely explosive. Now, volatility right now, trading right around 29. I'm showing the Dow up about 1%, NASDAQ up about 60 points, and the S&P holding around that 22, 23 area. So it's up about 26 points right now. Folks, have a great day of trading each and every day. Make sure knowledge is king. You've got to understand the derivatives world. When we listen to these financial earnings, when we listen to JP Morgan and they talk about the derivatives markets and trading, when we listen to Goldman Sachs and we talk about FIC and the derivatives markets and trading, this is the derivatives markets. These are the educators that give you the best information in the industry, because I think our guys are the very best. So check them out, Market Rebellion. Again, I'm Pete Najarian, and this is The Take for a Wednesday.